Paulo, man, welcome to Ultrahabits, bro. How are you going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's not every day that I get to have a friend on the show. Not only a friend, it's somebody that I actually grew up with, like someone that I've known
Yeah,
for a very, very long time. And in some ways, it's like I'm more nervous than usual. It's a bit weird.
I as well.
If the camera was off, we'd be totally goofy, right? But now we
Right.
gotta be serious. So, yeah, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Your story is remarkable. And it was really weird, interesting, intense to read your book because I connected to your journey. Like I knew the context, and that was a really strange experience. And to reflect on what you were going through as an outside party with the knowledge of what you're battling through was a real kind of it made things clearer, and it was a story that I felt we needed to get out, because just because of the potential impact.
There's a
So
lot going on where we grew up. There's a lot of dynamics going on there. Yeah, cultural,
yeah,
political, a lot of stuff at the bottom that people don't know or care about at the top, but it's very similar. Street politics. It's incredibly deep. You know, these kind of things, street politics, the life. This goes back. This is ancient as time. You know, who knew that black men and minorities and the places that we grew up like Richmond would be literally living through hell on a day-to-day basis just to get by and be oppressed and have a thumb on their head, you know, attached to America and attached to the whole world. you know this stuff is deep. It goes way back.
when we were growing up, you were writing music. You were a deep thinker. We were both deep thinkers, and I think in our crew, you and I actually went to the lowest depths, I think, of most people because of our addiction and everything that was going on. And at the time, particularly when we get high or whatever, like you go off, and like you would be writing and you would be connecting the dots, and we're all wigging out in our own little world. uh can you walk our audience through kind of your teens and how you started to go off the rails and what life looked like for you as a teenager?
When I went off the rails, I think it was probably right around freshman year, when I got into a bigger space of people and was feeling like I didn't belong. So I moved into I kind of went into you know, the white hood, right? So, and I had just barely made it out. I just got kicked out of the district for the second time in the hood. And so I ended up somewhere else. And I thought that I was, just nothing to these people. And so I tried to be something. And that's when the lies started. So, I thought that I could just tell people that, oh, I'm from Richmond, and I'm a gangster, I'm a Crip, these things. And no one cared. And they would just think that, wow, he's cool. I changed my name. I took the name of a Filipino kind of thug not thug, but someone who was down from back in the day, from back in Richmond, and I thought that that would make me cool. And so I had all these lies running, and started smoking weed the first day of school. Didn't know where to go. Didn't want to go to class. Completely distracted from actually using my forebrain because I think the deterioration of all the gang violence and just being ganked so many times. The first time that Jeff and I got jumped, we were what, 12, 13, just barely 13. And we had to run. Jeff had to squab. I ran off, came back. Jeff was sitting there squabbing. I had to knock this kid out, and then ran again, and then Jeff was safe, and I was safe. We kind of split off in different directions. It was a nightmare. This kind of thing kept going. It's perpetuated by me wanting to be cool, not feeling like I fit in, not feeling like I was, like what was valued at the time. Not only just being African American, which I had a lot of problems with. I was like, oh, I want to date this girl, but she only dates, guys of her own creed. And so what can I do to make myself a different creed? And then people picked up on that. Like, this guy's a fake. And so it just spiraled into me trying to succeed at life as a junior high schooler in a place where people were losing their virginities at 12 years old. This was a very, very, advanced kind of place in terms of what you had to be. You had to be very sophisticated to get through this quickly, and not quickly, but safely, and kind of like stay on your toes. And I didn't have that sophistication. I didn't know what was going to come. And so back to high school, I smoked out, and then I met Zig. And, he asked me if I wanted to do some meth. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. I know he was a cool kid. And this is a funny thing. When I first met Zig, I didn't respect him very much. I thought he was just a scrappy, scrappy guy jumping up and down, talking about how he beat some guy up the night before. And I was like, this guy's whatever, bro. Like, look at this white kid.
Yeah.
But, so, and maybe I should qualify that statement for everyone. I love white people. I'm half white, right? But, back then I came from out of the hood, and I was, quote unquote, Crespi was rough, bro. I mean, we had everybody there. We had every gang in Richmond was in Crespi, right? Full representation.
At 12.
At 12. And being chased around by these guys, you start to respect that more and more, the power they have, and you get snatched up from behind and thrown against a locker, and you got 5 people in front of you, and you're like, they're going to gank me. And that stuff is like nightmarish, yes, but like, how do you even deal with that as a kid? Honestly,
it's a cortisol overdrive.
Yeah, how do you function? It'll break you. So I was, my forebrain wasn't functioning as well as it should have. Maybe in the wrong ways, just looking for ways out, trying to find a logical solution to how am I going to get home past this bully. And those were the things I had to worry about the most, was like surviving the street. Like, no joke. Yeah. Anything could have happened. If I had been caught by some of these people who were after me, I would have been mauled. So change your whole life.
You ultimately joined a gang too that was quite they were a minority gang in a kind of sea of violent competitors, right? Like, that exacerbated the issue for sure, right?
Yeah, and they were insane. So they hated me just as much as they hated all the other people, and all the other people hated me just as much as they hated them. So I was kind of caught in the crossfire, and I think this happens to people.
It was a struggle for identity, and I think a lot of young people go through that. I think yours was heightened because of the mixed race piece, the trying to find your tribe, and then going into gangs, and then ultimately getting addicted to drugs. Where did that journey with drugs take you? And at the time, obviously, you now have a grasp on your mental health issues or challenges, but at the time, you obviously didn't know that you had these challenges. So you've got, you start to go down the journey of meth and using drugs. Where did that journey take you in terms of life, but also mentally? Like, what did that look like for you?
Well, I had a good mentor. To sidestep his backstory, the guy who I started smoking meth with, he was kind of a god at the street level. There's nothing that you could really throw at him that he couldn't handle. And confidently, and like, I would say consensus, have consensus from the street that he was still a G and he handled it like a G, right? Whatever a G is, sound like a gangster. Right? So he was the shit, quote unquote, back then. He had power. He could do whatever he wanted, and that he taught me a lot. He was very critical. He's very hard on me, and also loving in some ways. He cared. It was really cool for me because this is like the biggest gangster I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of gangsters by the time I got out there to the hood, to the white hood, right? So this is like the equivalent of the Tupac in that hood. And so I took pride in that, and I grew as a man, as a young man. I stopped taking stuff from people, and I started to take my life more seriously and think that I actually had some potential and I could kick some butt in life. And the meth deteriorated us over time. So eventually the meth took us apart, picked us apart. It picked you apart just like schizophrenia, which is funny because they say that methamphetamine-induced psychosis is identical to schizophrenia in every symptom profile, which is insane.
Do you relate to that?
I do. I believe that 100%. I've done both, so I can tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So he kind of brought me up, and when he was done, he tried to kill me. And so death was the end of that path. Death by, the most revered person in my life. So this is, and if you don't have anybody in your life that you revere, that's okay. But I have a lot of respect. I respect this guy more than God. And I'm very deep and very spiritual, and I'm smart, and I think about this stuff. I think about life. I think about who's in power and what it means. And so when he broke me, when he took my seatbelt off, drove me off that freeway while I was passed out, exactly as I awoke, to catch this guy in the dark, in this like foggy mindset, seeing something fumbling with my seatbelt, seeing his head be pressed up against the steering wheel. That was the scariest thing, the most nightmarish thing on an emotional level, on a physical level. It was completely unbelievable. It was unbelievable. And I was like a pretty sharp guy at that point. I understood some things about what was going on in life simply because of what we had to go through, because of how we had to maneuver.
With that, Apollo, and that was a pretty intense part of the book, I never was sure, because of the way that you wrote it, if you left it up for interpretation, it was part of your schizophrenia or it was real.
Well, schizophrenia doesn't attack until you are roughly like early 20s on average.
Right. Well, particularly what was creepy was the next day when you go in the mirror and there's like things carved in your back. So that would then intimate that he was happy to suicide himself, or did he protect himself?
That was the head on the steering. That was the head on the steering wheel. He was protecting himself from the shot, from the impact. Right. So if you kind of go like this and you brace yourself, you don't get smacked back. You don't die. Or, well, you don't get smacked back. You get smacked forward, right? So he would have went, wow, like me. Instead, he braced for it and just tried to kill me. Which is completely unbelievable because of how things were working. But it was so dark because I was on so much meth, first of all. That changes your entire perspective. People meet God on drug trips. They do, ketamine, they say, can, in some cases, cure depression with one shot. So it depends on how high you are, how things affect you. And I thought he was the devil. When I woke up in that kitchen, and so the story is pretty short. We were doing our thing, selling meth, doing things that are, both criminal and like deadly. When we got right to the point of getting into the game seriously, like we're going to go be meth ballers and probably end up in jail, but we didn't know that. Probably end up in jail or dead. And we got a whole big old pouch of meth that no one should ever have at that age. It's like, that'll kill you. That you give a kid $400 at that age, and when they're an addict, they're going to buy enough meth to die. And that's what happened. I mean, I went there. I went all the way to that level. I had 2 foot line of crystal, and I OD'd. I didn't die, but I blacked out. And when I woke up, he walked in the kitchen. Didn't know what was going on, but I could. It was it's like being paralyzed with fear and just being on so much dope, having no idea what transpired directly before this, and knowing that you are, for lack of a better phrase, you're at the mercy of the clerk. These guys are going to carve you up. And that's a silly thing because we watch all the, people Saw generation. We've seen a lot. It's a different story when you're there. When you wake up in, some serial killer's living room and you're paralyzed by, you got some night lock in your system. I didn't. It's just meth. But so the impact was psychologically very deep. It was, I think, mind altering in the sense that it definitely broke down a lot of connection. Just the shock, the trauma. It changed my mind, it changed my brain. And when I woke up the next day, I was a different person, and I never went back to that kid that I was before. Not that it was a bad or a good thing, but I was on death's doorstep, and I didn't know how to escape. And this is like what people deal with in Christianity a lot, right? Like in all kind of religions where they're like, I might go to hell, and they think about it. It would be different if a demon showed up in your room and was like, it's time to go, time's up. And that's a scary feeling. Time's up that's a scary feeling. It'll shock you.
So how old were you when this happened with Zig?
14, 15.
Okay, and that's kind of when, so you and I, we originally met when we were really little playing soccer, and then you went on your path, and then we reconnected, so around 14, 15, and then the run of, continual drug use happened and started to occur, and, the dropping out of school, and we just became complete delinquents.
What we were supposed to be. That's what that fosters, that entire area. And so many people just went there, and then they became the adult version of that, which is very shabby and sad. And we escaped that. But we were on the path. We were on the path to death or jail by 25.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And there's something to be said, like, and ironically, you're in the Silicon Valley now. And I mean, when we were growing up, I don't remember any tech, right? Like, obviously it would have been at the beginning of, and well in the middle of the development of the Silicon Valley, but we were so close yet so far. But the funny thing about the Bay Area, and part of it's what gives it its vibe, but there's this undertone of gangsterhood culture and everything, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing. That's a different. Well, now it's even weirder, right? Because you've got this tech overlay and tech money, but you've still got the have-nots just on the other side. So, in regards to your piece, so how did the meth use escalate ultimately to the meth use and the schizophrenia? How did that escalate to the point that you were like, I can't do this anymore?
So, now I'm going to get emotional about your story. So the thing was that for like the second time in my life, I reached a point where I had burned every bridge I had. And this is common with addicts. No one would talk to me. No one from the old crew would talk to me. No one from the meth crew would talk to me. My ex wouldn't talk to me. And my mom barely talked to me back then. She was kind of like, enough for a while there. I stayed with my father, who's this, big black dude from Mississippi who just old school, slow moving, slow thinking, very, very smart, but just old school in like every way, like he's from the past, living in the present. And I thought that was beautiful, looking back. I think that's beautiful looking back because he was just like this Creole, just crazy. And he's like trying to manage this kid. He's trying to manage this kid who's like almost killed himself twice now. And all he could do was like take me to those drug tests, and make sure I wasn't doing anything stupid on a day-to-day basis. I did come home drunk one time, and he flipped out. He picked me up off the ground, had me up against the wall by my neck, and I was scared, and I hit him in the head with my elbow. Because I'd been doing Muay Thai, right? So he told me, he always shows me the scar. You yelled me, right? You didn't even know you did it. You did it so fast, because I didn't even know I did that. But he was bleeding. And I'm like, Father was so good to me. And for you, I think your parents were immigrants, right? So they weren't hip to it. So you would just go smoke. You would just go do your thing, even though you had been on probation, even though you had to get drug tested 3 times a week randomly. For me, it was 3 times a week. I couldn't do anything in between those drug tests, or I'd be back in juvenile hall. And I heard you saying on one of your podcasts, on one of the times that you were able to, tell your story, I was like, he went back, into the system, and then get out and smoke again and violate. And this is the things I was scared of the most. I think maybe the difference between us is that you're not as afraid as I was of everything. And this is not about nurture. This is nature. I'm a very scared person in general. And I think that is just the nature of, having the schizoid personality and, the genes for it. I see dark things in the shadows, these kind of stuff, right?
You didn't come across that. I mean, the person you had cultivated yourself into when we're around 15 or 16, and obviously I use the word cultivated because we were all cultivating ourselves to look a certain way, was definitely not that. But I get that's just, a mirage that we were all creating, I suppose, right? But I think for me, my addiction trumped consequence, and I kind of got to a point where the consequences were so negative for so long. It was like, well, what's the worst that can happen?
I never went that deep. I remember you telling stories about some people that we both knew who are big meth heads, going to rob you, who we knew who we had known since junior high, and they got out of jail, and they were ready to rob you because you had the drugs and you were doing the thing. And I was just, that's scary. Like the fact that you were so deeply immersed in those Crip gangs and the whole culture. You were at the meta level of street life, right? A real hustler. You made it your creed. And I never got to that level, right? I kind of was too scared and just broken, and I couldn't respect myself anymore, and no one respected me. And even you, I was afraid of you. I was afraid of everyone we knew, and I wasn't a rock like you guys. And I know you're probably thinking that there's tougher people, right? Than people in our crew. But you guys were rocks. You guys weren't like me. I was a willow,
I think most of us were, and we were just trying to figure it out. I think that there were certain people that were more confident, and I think the drugs obviously has a way of breaking the strength of your psychology down, and a given to your earlier point, your schizophrenia as well. I just remember we'd get on one and we would all kind of lose the plot, but you would really lose the plot. And I guess when ultimately when I found out that you told me you were schizophrenic, it made sense, mate. Like, it wasn't like one of those things like, oh my God, that's so, like, it was like, oh, okay.
It's almost like comforting, right? Like, oh, there's nothing wrong with him. Oh, thank Jesus.
It was like, yeah, he's just, okay, yeah, right. Like, but So let's go into that schizophrenia piece though, like, because I think it's important for people that are dealing. I mean, that's a full on process, but anyone that's dealing with mental health, that's like coming to think they have it or coming to realize it, whether they're masking it and using drugs to medicate. Like, how did the schizophrenia escalate, and how at what point did you realize that was probably the underlying issue?
Oh, I never realized that. It wasn't an epiphany. I didn't tackle this myself, and that was the beginning of trust for me and other than things other than Ziggy and this kind of thing. I tried to, for the life of me, get meet the standard. I wanted to be the hardcore gangster, cool, whatever it was, sophisticated criminal thug, guy. And I tried, and I kept trying. Um, Ended up in New York for a while. Almost got, hurt there a lot. Ran into all the people who in the rap songs I thought were like the hardest, the coolest, the thuggest, but also like the deadliest. And then when I got there, it was like, oh, these guys will actually kill me too. They're very big on out of towners in New York. They don't like to deal with people who come to New York from other places. So I was in death's mouth a lot of times because I just kept messing up. I just didn't have the right perception of life, and I thought I had to be this, rock, right? I wanted to be the man. So eventually I did some more meth. It was like on and off after a while. It was like every 2 years or 1 year. I'd have a big problem.
You were
Schizophrenia.
undiagnosed though,
Yeah.
schizophrenic at this point.
At this point, I was schizophrenic. Well, at this point, I was I had acute. It wasn't acute, but it was you know definitely paranoid schizophrenia. One time, I did
What
some
did that
drugs, and I
look
started to
like?
hear. Yeah. So what did it look like? I heard voices all the time, every day, and I thought that was normal. I thought people were telepathic, um, and that's a very hard thing to traverse because you're inside your brain fighting a battle against, um, fighting a war inside your own head, but you're not like by yourself. I mean, the opposing army and warriors are there too, and they're very real. Their thoughts are very real. Their thoughts are accurately representing the people who you are feeling that presence from. You're interacting with them in your thoughts. You're thinking to them as opposed to talking to them. And these things, they own you. They guide you. They can tear you apart, and they do. And that's how schizophrenics fall. They just get ripped apart from the inside out. They can't satisfy all the demons, and they're demons from their life, from the world they live in, not Satan. Yeah.
Did the drugs exacerbate it, or when you were on drugs, did it feel like it made it okay? Okay, it made it worse.
The last three times I did math, I think it was like once a year for 3 years until I turned 21. And the last time I did that, the last three times, I started to hear voices like immensely. It got really scary, and I thought that I was delusional. I thought I could somehow talk to people about what was going on, about what I was thinking about, and they would just be on the boat, like, oh yeah, whatever you were thinking about, I heard because we're all telepaths, and so that makes sense that you just told me something super crazy and out of this world. I just was I was full blown schizophrenic. It got acute every time I did meth. Within one hit, it would be great, and then 2 hours later, it'd be, oh wow, I'm a psychic, I'm a telepath, I'm an astronaut, out here in outer space, man.
It's interesting because although I'm not schizophrenic, for me, I ultimately had to quit meth too because of and I'm still dealing with this as well. And I don't know if it's from the life I lived or just my constitution, but what started to happen towards the end of my meth using was my anxiety was so acute, I actually couldn't use it anymore. I would just sit froze and like I just under full blown anxiety attacks, and my back and everything would seize up. I'd have to go to the masseuse because I'd have so much inflammation. I'd be so sore because I'd be so tense, which happens anyways when you're on something like speed. But it just became super acute to the point where I just couldn't use it anymore. I wonder if that's an age thing. Like when you start using something so young, you get to a point. But I mean, a lot of people obviously push through that. I also think that there was, for me, my conscience started to eat me away in respect to meth. Like I could no longer have fun. It stopped being fun a long time ago, and it was medication for a long time. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it stopped being medication, and it just became worse.
It'll tear you up. I mean, it just turns you inside out. You would have most likely, if you'd kept going. And see, as you get older, I don't know what that. You mentioned age. It starts to deteriorate you in different ways then, and you meet these people who are talking to themselves and talking in circles. They have word salad. Word salad is what it sounds like. They're trying to talk to you about or they need to say something, but they have all these kind of like pressure points in their mind that they're trying to hit with their words. And so it comes out like an ad lib, literally. You just take a bunch of stuff they're trying to say and change all the nouns change all the verbs to whatever word you want, and then read it back and say, oh, wow, this is crazy. Yeah, it's like, yeah, that's how they get. And the age, the paranoia, people die. People we knew are dead because they went back and did meth at like 30 or 35, and they died in one shot. Like they got high and they got so scared. It broke them so quickly. It took their mind apart so fast because as an adult, you don't have the same, you're not indestructible anymore, including your brain. You're more sensitive. You can rock up, I'm pretty sure. Well, I don't know what would happen if David Goggins did some meth. He has a very powerful mind, right? Normally it will kill you. It will get you to a place where you're so paranoid that you're going to just die, jump off a building or something. And this happened to one of the people that was around when we were back then.
Yeah. They jumped off a freeway or something onto oncoming cars. Right.
Yeah. I don't want to name his name, but
Zig passed away too, didn't he?
He did. That's interesting. Yeah. I had not realized that. I knew that. Yeah, I didn't think about that in context here. Also true. Yeah. So, a famed mentor had become schizophrenic, but he wasn't schizophrenic. He was meth-induced psychosis. He heard voices all the time, and all he could say was all he wanted was just close it. He would say, "Close the portal. How can I close the portal?" Because it's, and I associate with that. It is a portal. It's like someone just sees right into your brain, and it's very scary, and you can't, or it's just irritating, and it's just a pain. It's just sick because you got this portal into everything. If you talk bad, if you think something bad about an actor, the actor will pop in. If you think something bad about an old friend, the old friend pops in, and sometimes these things resonate. So after I started college, and I started college on a whim. A Chinese guy told me that you should go to school. And so I went, and I didn't want to work anymore. So that kind of made sense. Like, this is a way out. I can go to school.
How old were you when you started? Because I think that's a remarkable journey. And so you're sober-ish now, and you're dealing with the schizophrenia medically. And you
I didn't know that. I didn't know I was a schizophrenic. That happened at the end of junior college, and that almost wrecked the whole train again because it had kind of gone away. Like the voices kind of died down. And I kind of felt
rewind the tape on that though. How did you get into junior college? Because going to junior college is not an easy thing to do because it's almost like it's like high school. You have to have a lot of discipline to be successful at junior college, right? Like you were a dropout. What was the I'm going to go to junior college. Like, what? Why? How'd that happen?
I didn't know what was happening in my life. I was scared of everything, confused by everything. My ex-girlfriend, of course, was like one of the big things that ripped my heart out when I was in high school. And that's just natural because, you've been with someone for 5 years and, and you're on a bunch of drugs and then bad things happen. I had a dream that she was there dancing using the, with, like these tie with the long hat and long nails, right? And I felt that same red, that same burgundy jealousy, right? I was seeing burgundy, right? Just the pain, the anxiety, the heartbreak, that feeling when someone cheats on you, you get in your stomach, and it just, kind of breaks you. And they say that can give you brain damage, when someone cheats on you. And of course, I never knew if she did or not. And so that adds to the equation. And these two geeks walk out in the middle of the dream and they're like, you need to get a degree. And I'm like, if you want to understand what's happening up on that stage right now with that woman, you need to get a degree. And so took that, started working in Chinatown. It was hot. I was painting. It sucked. And the guy's like, you should go to school. That's the second time someone's told me that. Except the first one was me. Some dude came out looking like Bill Gates and was like, get a degree. And so, and I actually ended up like best friends with like several straight geeks who, were, one of which my best buddy at Berkeley. Quite honestly, I went after him like a man goes after, or actually, I shouldn't say that, stupid, thinking about myself. I went after him like I would go after a girl. And that's because I thought he was like the next Bill Gates. And I had never seen anything so admirable and flashy and cool in my life. So I did that. And,
Who was he? Who was he? And how did you meet him?
He's a kind of super genius named Evan Battaglia. He writes code mainly on the back end. So like the back end of a web server, he writes internet code on the backside. Very, very smart. I mean, at Berkeley, you're already surrounded by smart people. And he was the smartest of the smart people by a margin. So
how did you meet him though? Like, so you're painting in Chinatown, and how does this dude Evan just rock up in your life?
No. So this is Evan was further forward. So, so the dream was these Bill Gates looking geeks, and it's funny that 3 years later I'm at Berkeley, and I befriend this guy, and it was a slow process. Like I was a creeper. I was one of those like stalker level creeper guys, with respect to some woman, but it was this guy Evan. And it was for a different purpose. I mean, he was my best friend. I loved him dearly, emotionally. And I just thought that he was powerful and it was beautiful. And the brilliance, I didn't know geniuses really existed. I thought they were like, creepy, savant looking, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. Well, creepy is probably not desirable. But I just, you see these like Rain Man, right? And you're like, that's a genius or something. I don't know.
The interesting thing about that is he's the new Zig in a positive way.
Indeed. And what broke my heart back then was that he would never hurt me, and he didn't even know how. And that was, how do you have friends who don't drink, don't do drugs, have never drank, have never done drugs, will never drink, will never do drugs, and they've been in school their whole life, kicking butt, way ahead of everybody. They have humility, they have respect, they're in their own lane, they care about you, and they won't hurt you, and you respect them. This is like Zig, but he respected me, But you're right, it was the exact same, not relationship, but I think his level of intelligence is mirrored in someone like Ziggy on the street, because he just knows what he's doing. And, he's not the most charismatic in these things, but to me, he was charismatic. It was charismatic that he was the smartest kid at the smartest school, but he wasn't cocky, wasn't like Malfoy or Potter, right? He wasn't one of these like, he was just like on the sidelines doing his thing. He rode a unicycle, you know? He didn't have a girlfriend. Yeah, it was just me. It was just me and him. And that was so beautiful, you know? What a cool relationship.
So you met him ultimately at Berkeley, but you did a couple years in junior college, and to go from no schooling to junior college, that was really the commencement of the path, right? So you decide in junior college that you're going to do coding for whatever reason. Like, did you know at junior college that you were going to do coding and computer science, or was that not yet known?
I think that just fell on me. Um, I talked about being a doctor. I'm going to be a doctor. And that same Chinese guy was like, that's very hard. He's like, you should go to school. I'm going to be a doctor. That's very hard. And then I saw in my mind's eye, like myself working with like machines. And I said, oh, maybe I'll do HVAC. And it turned out that that vision, whether accurate or not, is actually quite accurate because I work with these big machines now all day, every day. I'm attached to a machine 24/7. And I didn't know that was coming, but I chose it like out of nowhere. Like probably make a lot of money in CS because I didn't know CS was. Probably make money programming. And my stepdad knew programmers who made a lot of money. And I want a girl who's hot. So I got to make lots of money. Let's do programming. And everything else just fell in place. My mind was ready, you know, like.
There's something to be said about being choosing your path and just being committed and not necessarily thinking about too many options.
I think it chose me, you know,
I
it
don't
just
doubt
pulled
that.
me, sucked me in.
You made a decision to pursue computer science because you want to make a lot of money, you want a hot girlfriend, and some people that your dad knows, they've done well in it, and then Chinese dude told you that being a doctor is going to be too hard. So and you know, I would argue that the path you took was probably just as or more difficult, but I mean, you know, you probably spent more time in school actually ultimately now, but that's a different story. So you decide to go to DVC, which is a junior college, and for what people don't know, particularly with DVC, it's kind of like high school on steroids. It's a bit hood, and it's for people that generally haven't known what they were going to do in high school, didn't do too well in high school, and they want to bridge into a 4-year university by doing the first year or two in junior college. So you so I think that's challenging. It's a challenging situation, and you haven't done school well for a long time. So now you're at DVC, you have a grasp on your addiction. Like it's you kind of move towards the end of that piece. You've had a couple more runs, and you now know you're schizophrenic. Is that correct?
So that I didn't know I was schizophrenic. I thought it was just normal stuff. Um, it had died down after, so it had died down from the initial break, which came when I was about 19. And by the time I left DVC, it was acute. It was completely unmanageable. And then I got diagnosed, and I still didn't really believe it. But, you know, uh, had family there with me, and you know, my mom actually moved my sister into the apartment underneath my apartment. And so Snai was there looking out for me. And my mom was the one who really convinced me to go to a doctor. And I still didn't want to believe. I thought she was against me. The doctor was against me. Tanaya was against me. The entire world was against me. And they started to prescribe medication, which I would not take because it's a scam, right? They're going to hustle me. You know, I'm the martyr, and they're trying to silence me. And we tried all bunch of different, actually all kinds of different meds, a whole bunch. And I think the good thing about that was that each one is meant to, you know, deal with psychosis. So slowly the psychosis, though I wasn't picking one and I wasn't sticking to one, it was kind of dying off. Like each one was like a step to the next. Like I can kind of think now. So, okay, we're trying meds now. Okay, I'm schizophrenic now. I don't like this med, but I get it. And that was my last semester at DVC, a semester in which I had been chased around by the cops, several fights, several just things that can get you in a lot of trouble. I could have been hurt pretty badly. I could have wound up um, back in county. It, a lot of things could have went wrong, and so I kind of got scooped out of that. I only had one class left, and it was computer science. I could actually do the computer science, even though I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't take the math. I couldn't think really, but I could program a little bit, and then it started to cool off. And right about that time, I got the emails coming from the schools, and so right when the schizophrenia was starting to right when psychosis was starting to break, I waltz on a campus and you know see this girl opening her email, and she's got this big golden blue screen, and I clicked my email and I had the same screen. It was really exciting. It's like the last thing you did before you went crazy was got yourself out of here.
It's a remarkable story, and there's so many questions there. Apollo, the first question is, why do you think the schizophrenia escalated? And I mean, primarily because you were sober. It's interesting. Like, you were now pretty sober, but the schizophrenia escalated. And like, was that because you were in a new environment? Like, you were insecure. You were obviously studying. And also, like, how did you learn and adapt a new skill like schooling while you're going through schizophrenia? Like, that's pretty intense. Like, what do you think? I guess let me recap the question. Like, what do you think sparked the intensity of it, and then how did you manage schooling? Because I remember in your book it was pretty messy, the DVC period, right?
Academia kind of works on a gear system where you turn the crank, right? You have your little gear and you turn the crank, and it's turning the crank on these other gears, and it's turning the crank on these other gears, and as you for lack of a better analogy, as you move up that gear stack, you still got the part of you that's just trying to keep going. Let's use these basics that we know. Get off the street, don't be a bum. And then pretty soon the next gear is like, oh, I can do math. And then the next gear is like, oh, I can do higher level math. And then I can program. And although I had some trouble the entire time because of schizophrenia, because I was in and out of psychosis, in and out of hearing voices, in and out of breaks, it was still rough. But at the end, it was just too much. And I think that came from the stress of getting to that top gear, where that you have something going on here now, and you are something, and it starts to scare you because you start to look down. And I was, again, just coming straight off the street into school. There was no reason why I should be able to do this. And then there's like that lion heart from the street that wants you to be the best at this. And so I had way too ambitious, and it was working, but it was exploding inside my head. All these demons were coming out and attacking through the schizophrenia. All these, everything from the past, our entire experience, it all came back to try to eat me alive. Not every person, almost every person I would think about or remember would eventually degrade into this kind of like, this like demon that just deriding me, gnarling in my mind. And that was an everyday thing at the end. And then I couldn't handle it anymore. It was almost like I thought they were jealous, and this is me, all of it. And I just couldn't fight my own demons. I was just getting bodied there. So,
Do you think sobriety and being sober, whilst it might have stabilized you, it also introduced you to what was really going on under the hood? Like, you had masked a lot of shit through, using whatever. and now you're like sober and you're under stress from school, and like you're having to be with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, that opened a portal for all kind of doubt and insecurity and just being scared all the time. Like, why did all that happen? Dark past, and not a lot of understanding of why.
The nature of your fear though did it change? Like when you were on the streets, it was always like threat of violence and threat of death. Like, was it still the same?
I mean, schizophrenia attacks every weakness you have because it's in your head and it knows you. You know it, and it is you. And so it kind of just picks you apart. So it wasn't just, yeah, I didn't have any threats of violence that I didn't bring upon myself by acting out in the schizophrenia. It was more just trying to just melt me from the inside out. It just felt like these people just, you know, it just felt like real martyrdom. And I thought it was all real. So that made it even worse. And it's hard to deny an auditory voice or a presence in your mind, someone that is communicating with you, through your thoughts, in your thoughts, with your thoughts, and you have no defense there. As soon as you start to doubt yourself, it opens that wound up and just, pours lemon juice on it.
I think one of the greatest struggles for humans as a result of the human condition is the struggle of being subjective beings, right? Like we're the only kind of creature on this planet that can think in past and present and future simultaneously. And a lot of times we're using future analysis, which is effectively imagination, to try to discern what may or may not happen. And for me, it's always been a problem. My mind has always been interesting because it's just how I'm geared. Hence why I sought, substances to quell that. And so for me, it's a big part of mastery is coming to grips with fact, fiction, and trying to remain as objective as possible. For someone like you, it's further complicated. How do you know when you're getting lost in a world of fantasy and imagination? Like, how do you manage that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. That that really is the question of the day. So over the course of 13 years in school, each night was a struggle, and every every day I dream, and I remember my dreams, and they're always nightmares. So it became more encapsulated. And when I would get outside, I'd see people, I'd see the sky, I'd see, reality. And that was very easy to step into. But when you're alone, it still gets difficult. And it's still a fight. It's still an argument. Uh, uh, you know, um, it's still an argument very much. It got a little bit more, I think, I wouldn't say benign, but the interaction was more like, we're going to bother you as much as we can to stop you as best we can from being successful. And we kind of know we're losing. So a lot of the nights ended with, kind of like, kind of like an epic state, not an epic statement, but, something solid, a solid, thought into myself, into these, demons, whatever it was, and just walk off, the walk off bunt, right? The walk off home run. Every night it was get through it. And then at the end, it's like, well, look, I told you so. I'm going to sleep. You know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to be back out there trying to kill it. So, give up, and schizophrenia never gives up on you completely, right? And it hurt a lot. It's the threshold. My threshold for pain is, I would say it's actually quite low, but what are you going to do? You can't you can't die. You can't give up. You can't go jump off a bridge. So I just, out of respect for myself, pushed through it. But it's a nightmare, I mean, this is something hard to figure out. Well, maybe it's simple. So it's basically, I didn't give up, even though it was a lot of pain. And schizophrenia is an interesting training experience for that kind of thing, because you can't escape it. It's 24/7. It's 24/7 and 365 and all decade. So it kind of gets old. As you begin to look back on it, you think, okay, well, it's not going to get me. I've come this far. And then that very night, you spiral down into it, and you can't see your way out when you're in there. You can't tell yourself you're going through it. The schizophrenia will put you through it every night. And I remember at Berkeley, sometimes I'd get, one of our buddies from back in the day would come in, and they would kind of torture me while I was doing my mathematics. I'd be trying to solve a problem or read something, and it would just be full on deriding and just all this derogatory stuff pumping into my mind about how I'm stupid, I can't make it, I can't do math, I'm just a minority, I'm just a wannabe, I'm just all these things. And I got tougher as I got older. But I think what came with that was a lesson to respect for my opponent. And I think you have to kind of rock up. Your ego has to kind of take a little bit of a stand. And that can hurt you, because now you're into your own, and you might have a little bit of a blind spot for other people and not have enough respect. And so I ran into that going up through the educational system. I realized that at some point I was chasing my mentors, and I was being mentored by people, and I was gravitating and pulling myself up, and they were pulling me up. And then your ego, you kind of have to do it yourself at some point. You can't always be your mentor's baby. And then your mentors start to be your peers, your competition, co-opetition, whatever you want to call it. And not having a healthy respect is a very bad thing when you have people who are strong enough to be your mentors in high level performance-based fields. So it kind of, you got to stir that up and get your respect back at some point, but also, it does help you to have a little bit of ego there to just say, I've done this much and you can't kill me.
That philosophy is one I share. Like, sometimes you kind of have to act your way into a better place. Like, action is the only way through. Like, you have to go through it. You can't go around it or over it. And what I'm hearing you say is that you were proving to yourself. Like, I've got some Navy SEAL buddies, and they talk about earning your trident every day. There's this kind of proving to yourself piece. And I think for some of us, we have to unfortunately do that more than others, because of the negativity that you may be battling. So you're saying that as you started to kind of prove and prove to yourself that you got this and you can do this, the voices started to lose their strength. And did you find that sometimes it was better to not engage them? Like do you always engage them? Like, if let's say it personifies into a person or a voice, and it's talking at you, do you find it's of value to talk back to it, or does that take you further into it, or do you have strategies to like just leave it alone? Like, what or is it both? Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah. So the beauty of schizophrenia is that it has the ability to, it's part of your brain, right? So it's not a completely separate entity. And in some ways, it can control you. No one has a threshold for attention, focus, pain, energy that just goes forever. And eventually it will spark you, and you'll say something back. You'll be upset. Get out of my head. Shouldn't be here. And it's always a conversation. As soon as you interact, it interacts back. There's no comfortable silence. It's just, if you go at it, it goes at you. And so you have to manage that. You have to engage just enough to get it out of your head. And at the same time, you cannot get lost in it and caught up in this silly stuff that's going on in your head. Some of it may be legit, and I think some of it helps with it's they're like these things that get into your head, medicated or not. You're still going to have some symptoms of schizophrenia. And my wife, she calls them my what is it? Tianxian Bao Bao, which is Chinese for Teletubbies.
So she's kind of that's skillful though, right? Like she's kind of minimized the threat and how you think about it too. Mm.
They're antennas. It's how I perceive, it's how I feel things. I mean, I'm blinded a lot by schizophrenia in that it's controlling the perception to some degree. It's me. And it's also a way to feel your way, have some intuition and some instinct into situations around me that are actually real, where there could be threats, even if it's just career competition. It keeps me on my toes. And as horrible as it is, that's how my mind works. So I can't get away from that. So I use it. I don't use it, but the way it works is it gets me into positions where I'm less unsafe in my actions and the things that I'm going to do, because I'm constantly being attacked or having this conversation with my enemy. You see what I'm saying? It's like if you're just sitting at the table with your enemy and he's never going to stop. There's no peace talks, right? But you're aware of what he's up to, and he's aware of what you're up to. And that also brings into this, it also brings respect into it. So respect is like a big deal, right? Because in every sport, in every competition, in every aspect of life in which there is resistance, don't respect your enemy wins. In the souls community, they say, attack first, die first. So, and that's the truth. So if you don't have a healthy respect of these demons, and there's demons everywhere. And just the fact that you're competing with all these people, and those people are also in your head, makes for a pretty interesting, fight. You both have an open book, except their book is, they don't have schizophrenia, so they're able to fight much harder, longer, better, and for me, it's about preparation. It's about, as soon as you do that, I know where it's coming from, because I've already been through that, and you've already treated me horrifically somewhere in my head in the past, or someone who's just like you, or close, or some approximation. So they really are like antennas, and it helps me with prediction. My predictions are very good.
So that's interesting. So there's a fine line between gut instinct, right? Like we rave and celebrate people that have the ability to future see, right? Have the crystal ball. And that can be confusing, right? Like you're kind of saying that your hypervigilance is a competitive advantage in some ways. And so two questions. Do you feel like it's the hypervigilance that gives you the ability to be prepared, or is it actually schizophrenia gives you opens you up to greater depths of perception?
All the above. It can be a detriment. It holds me back. My compute speed is quite slow because I have so much noise. So you could think about it like an internet circuit where you're dropping packets consistently, and there's crosstalk so it's hard to get the lesson out. And that's why schizophrenics talk around in circles, and they're very disconnected. I'm not. have medication, and have a good network. And so I can piece those things together, but it still takes time. If you're being yelled at and you're trying to write a paper, it takes more time.
With this study, I wanted to ask you about that. Like, I mean, it's a skill, and you had to learn math. Presumably, while most of your other kids that you were in school with were probably already high level math, did you discover that you were good at math while you were on the journey, or was it something you had to work your ass off, or was it both? Like how did were there oh shit moments when you're in class and you're like, dude, how am I gonna do this? I can barely add or subtract. Like, like
Absolutely, that is exactly what happened. Almost every class, every math class was just a nightmare. Calculus was a nightmare. I was scared to death. I mean, you've got equations as long as your sheet of paper, um, 2 or 3 lines, variables popping out at the top, popping out of the bottom. It looks like a South Park. It looks like a South Park. You remember the Canadians in South Park, how their head would kind of open to the side? I had schizophrenia, so I'm imagining this stuff. I'm looking at these equations, and there's like popping out this way and popping out this way, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Um, and then there was linear algebra, which was also very, very scary. Differential equations, very, very scary. These were the hardest exams in my life because mathematics is core to everything. If you can't do the math, you're gone. Now, that's arguable in terms of programming and programming people. I thought it was the core, and it is definitely very root to everything that we do as computer scientists. And I was scared all the time, just freaked out. But so was everybody else. And that's the cool thing is a couple of geniuses, but you could see the fear in the air for sure.
yeah, university's interesting. I remember doing post grad, and because I came from where you came from, there'd be times in class where the teacher was like confusing the shit out of everyone, and I'd put my hand up and say, hey, whatever the teacher's name was, like, everyone's confused in here, but they're acting like they're not. Can you, and everyone would start laughing and get real about it because university is a funny environment because people are there's a gamification going on, right? And people don't want to seem like the dumbass in the room or they'll be left out of group assignments and shit. And so everyone's kind of like too scared to say, I think particularly in post grad, right? Because you're supposed to know shit. And the teacher's moving like at Mach speed, almost like to take the piss out of everyone in the room, right? Like just to confuse everyone on purpose. It seems that way anyway. But I mean, it's just remarkable. I mean, what did you learn about yourself? You and I have this conversation all the time. Like you're a really humble guy now. A lot more humble than we were growing up. Like you're completely different in that sense. But one of the interesting things is in some ways you're quite Australian, and you'll talk yourself down in many ways, and it's a humility piece. I get that, but I mean, what you did and what you've done is remarkable in the sense like you real time had to learn the basics to probably do the math that you guys were looking at. Like you didn't even have the precursor work down. What did you learn about yourself as you were starting to become successful through not only your undergrad at Berkeley, then your postgrad, through to your PhD? Like, was this serving your confidence? Like, how was your narrative shifting for the better or for the worse through that whole journey of fucking 12 years or whatever it was, man?
Yeah, this is a golden question. So they say in grad school that you get stupider every day. You grow dumber by the day, right? And can you imagine? Can you think of why? Can you imagine
I
why?
think you real.
Yes,
I think you probably
yeah.
real. Yeah,
You realize
yeah.
how
You
much you
realize
don't know.
what you don't know. Yeah.
And so that was definitely true. I know less math now than I did at the beginning. Not at the very beginning, but once I took my last math class and started all the computer science stuff at Berkeley, where you have math right up to where you kind of specialize, and then I feel like I just kept learning more and more about what I didn't know about math, and so I felt worse and worse about my mathematics skills. And my advisor in grad school was very good at math, and so we would battle over those mathematical details. And he thought, maybe I didn't have the chops for it, And I definitely I thought I didn't have the chops for it. And then I realized there's abstraction. So mathematics is it's a grind, right? Especially arithmetic, right? Calculus and these kinds of things. Abstraction is golden though. So being able to understand that the details work, the machinery is there, and the gear that you started in algebra 1 still connects to all the other gears. And at the highest level, you start to look down and forget things and think, oh, what is this? What is this tech here? What do I need to do to figure this out? And what are all these underlying things? My advisor showed me a lot about abstraction and showing getting above those and starting to see and understand what is happening in mathematics. And yeah, it's really just machinery.
Did the mathematics and complexity, how did that work with your schizophrenia? Like being so cerebral all the time, like you're always in your head. Like, was that made it worse, or like you're up there with your friends now? Are they helping you do calculations too? Like, are they adding any value at least if they're rent free? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. So going back to linear algebra in Berkeley, where I was being just assaulted every day by massive amounts of schizophrenia and derision and hate from inside my own mind, I couldn't work as fast as I wanted to, nor as long as I wanted to. So I think one thing it took away from was the grind. And you can't grind if someone's punching you in the back of the head for too long, And yeah, so I think by the end, the math I could do, like I said, you get used to it. You see enough of this stuff and you're not scared of it anymore. And the machinery is there. And you have to understand that the machinery means sometimes you can't explain what's happening in the math. You can't show it to somebody or say, this is why this integral works this way necessarily. But you can show them the calculation and you can reduce it to an equality. And everybody understands that. You can say, oh, this is okay. So this is the equality. And that's why this has to be true. This is a mathematical proof.
so
on
you're
why
saying
this
you
has
don't
to be
you
true.
necessarily
So,
get the answer, but yeah, okay. I think I get what you're saying.
you can trust the math. You can trust the math. So you don't have to do every calculation and so on. And that's one of the beauties of it. But yeah, so you asked if I had any help from anything in there. And I think the focus was there just because you have to focus all the time. So if there's no particular voice at the moment, you can really get in there and you can grind some stuff out. And I've solved some really cool problems in my career. I mean, not to be cloudy, but yeah, I've seen some things through years and years of work and staring at the same problem, but having that dedication and that like psychotic level of focus, like I'm not going to quit. And all these voices are saying quit. And some of those voices are your peers, are real people saying quit, stop, you're not good enough, you're a minority, you're from the street, you're not smart enough, you don't have enough math, you haven't done enough math, you don't know enough about the architecture, you're not a whatever. But you stick on that problem because you're used to that attack, that those dogs everywhere. So it helps you to focus. And when you do get a moment of peace, for example, if schizophrenia left me and my mind still worked as efficiently, I'm not saying it's super efficient, but if it still worked at the same level that it normally does, I would have quite an edge, I feel. But that'll never happen. And we'll never know.
What do you do now? Now that you're like, what for a living, Apollo? Like, where are you at? What are you doing?
I am a PhD engineer working on graphics products at NVIDIA. So I write software and I do math, I do research, I apply the research, do more math, turn it into a product, and do more math. And do a lot of coding. So we have to debug things that are very, very, very difficult to debug. You got these millions of lines of code systems, and this is something you cannot teach in grad school, and something a researcher cannot trivially get through. So I have the research background, the PhD, but and as much respect as I have for research labs and researchers, um, my skill set spans, and so I kind of I tried to go hardcore, maybe be a professor or be a research scientist. But nowadays, what I do is I try to bridge that gap between engineering and science, and I'm kind of right in the middle. But I have my tendencies, and sometimes that's rough. And applied, it's just applied research, basically.
With coding, like any, I guess, subculture, because everything, I think there were subcultures, and I think coding would have its own unique DNA and subcultures and who's respected and just kind of different styles of coding. Like, presumably, like, video games haven't been around for a very long time in the scale of things. Like, has coding been like a wild west? Like, are people figuring out how to do it, or is it pretty like is it a pretty mature? It's mature.
It's very hard to make progress now. People are using AI for that more and more these days. The problems that are left are incredibly difficult to solve.
Like, because I'm trying to put it in the context of like a normal
That's a great
people.
question.
Like, what's a problem that you guys are trying to solve?
So, for example, I work in light transport. So this is following the physics of light around a virtual environment and then figuring out what it looks like from some place within that virtual environment as if it was a camera. And that's how 3D movies work. The camera's moving around, but that camera doesn't exist. It's a 3D and virtual environment. The characters and games work the same way. So my life is given a camera, figure out what light is hitting that camera, figure out what's ending up on those receptors in the camera. And that's what we refer to as light transport. It's just basically math, physics, Monte Carlo integration, all this cool stuff.
So let's unpack that. So an example is you're saying like in a video game, there's like light moving around when you're playing in the video game, right? And that light, because it's artificial, it's a virtual environment, has to appear natural within that environment. And
Yeah.
you're saying that that is not easy to do. I wouldn't even think that's a problem. That's insane. It's because
it's a huge integration problem. I mean, photons are charging out of the sun and out of lights in the room and everywhere else, and they're bouncing off the mirrors in the background, and how they bounce off those mirrors is different from how they bounce off the walls, is different from how they bounce off my shirt, is different from how they bounce in and out of my skin. You can see through your fingers sometimes, and there's a million different materials. And so that's the first problem we try to solve, is how do you deal with millions of materials? And the second one is lights. As I was just talking about, what if you have a million lights? What if you're trying to draw a city or a warehouse? And now you have to simulate not only the photons coming out, coming out of a few lights in your room and eventually ending up on the screen of your camera, but now you have to simulate a million of those, and you already have several million pixels, and light bounces around. It can bounce around millions of times. So the most difficult things that we're trying to solve are what we call mini lights problems. And it sounds trivial. Again, it does. Mini lights isn't it just a lot of stuff that you have to do the same thing with? And actually, it's because of efficiency, because brute force doesn't work at the current compute power level that we're at in the world. We just don't have the compute power we can't simulate what is happening in reality fast enough to make it look like it's reality and be interactive. Like a movie is a completely different problem from a video game. And that's why video games don't look like movies, because it's very difficult to make you look exactly like you. We have to simulate almost everything there, all the material, all the light transport, everything that's bouncing around in your room to get it to look right.
so you're saying,
This is the
are you
fundamental
saying
problem.
the utopia for video games is to literally make it look like it's real life?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the holy grail. That's 1,000% the holy grail. Well, to at least make it look, because you can have a cartoon-like video game, and there whatever it is that you're trying to simulate, you want to be in that environment, because you can have Pixar movies that are cartoons, but they look a lot better than video games still, right? Even though they're still cartoons. So yeah, that's the gist of what we care about.
It's extraordinary. So we're gonna start to land the plane here, Apollo. Like I could really talk to you for another 2 or 3 hours, which we might actually figure out a way to do. But you know, you're for people out there that are obviously going through any mental health piece, or whether it be schizophrenia, like you obviously take your medication, you do what you need to do to live a productive way through this situation that you have. Like you're killing it and you're crushing it. Like I feel, and I think most of the world would feel. Uh, do you do you are there like do you surround yourself with other people that are successfully managing schizophrenia? Like, have you shined the light on it a lot through like conversations with peers? Like, how do you have you brought it out of the closet, like by conversations like this? Do you do this all the time? Like, I'm just trying to understand, like, by removing the stigma and talking about it, have you done, I know that you've written a book. Like, are you social about this now?
Not exactly, except for in the form of podcasts, interviews, or talks I give, and I've only given about a handful of those in each on this topic. My my bosses know, my family, of course, my family and I go out over this like a broken record, normally because I want to talk about it again and I'm trying to figure something out or mull through something in my mind, and they're the closest to me and they understand all of it, so I can kind of pick at the story and try to figure something out there. And all my closest peers know. I think I'm the source of knowledge for them about what schizophrenic experience is like, and they don't know that because we talk about it all the time, but because they know me, and every once in a while I'll throw it out there, with in response to some topic that relates to difficulties or struggles or make some analogy. So no one I know is schizophrenic. I've never met a schizophrenic,
Really?
and no.
Wow.
So it's much more on the surface, and even with people who have a deeper understanding, they respect that, and I respect them. I don't need to be talking about this crazy stuff all the time, so we just work on mini lights.
I think there's definitely a value
Talk
in.
about light transport.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think there's definitely value in just doing the needful things sometimes and focusing on what's right in front of us. I read your book, Through the Valley Streets, Schizophrenia and Success in Tech. It was remarkable. It was a great read, and it obviously for me, knowing the context was even more impactful. We're gonna put that in the show notes. I think anyone that is dealing with any kind of challenge or just wants to understand the life in schizophrenia, tech, and it's just because you've got so many different dynamics going on, academia as well. It's just a totally dynamic read. But I really want to thank you for your time, Apollo. I really, really appreciate you, man. Thank you for being so honest, so open. I'm gonna come and see you when I get back to California in January. Yeah, I'll be there and we'll catch up again. But really want to, appreciate you and thank you for your time on the show today, man.
Well, thank you. You're a wonderful host. Um, I'm glad I know you, and it's been a long time for both of us. I don't think anyone else I know of from back then could hold this conversation with me. And not only that, I don't even really feel like I know you're going to smack me, but I don't really feel that it's all worthy of someone like you, someone like yours time. But you gave that to me. You came here and you opened up the story. You cracked it open a little bit. We got 2 hours of it now. And I hope this message gets out. I hope people can figure out what this is all about. But people like you are the ones, especially, which is why I love watching your podcast. People like you crack these things open, and you don't take no for an answer, and you don't take gloss and hand wavy answers, for answers. You ask the real questions, and you ask the hardest questions, and the hardest questions are how, right? There's a why, there's a what, there's all those things. There's a story, there's the motivation, but then there's technique. What are you going to do when you leave here? What are you going to build? And I believe that habits are a huge part of that, because that's all I ever see progress from, is when the habit kicks in, you know, you start to see, oh, okay, I can do this thing. I can make this work. And so I just respect what you guys do so much. And don't forget that. So thank you, man. You are a blessing. Yeah. From whatever God there
Oh,
is.
brother, thank you so much, Apollo. We'll be talking to you soon, bro. Thank you so much for that.
All right, man. Peace.